industry and profits in the United States had never been higher in American history up to that point. Okay? But only a very select few men had control of all the wealth. We talked about the robber barons, the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan, people like that. Those are the men that dictate really everything: the price of goods, how much wages are, working conditions. Everything that Americans had to deal with were really set by these very select few wealthy individuals. So they decided everything, the cost to consumers on everything from coal to whiskey to canned peaches. So in anybody that tried to compete with them and maybe start a small business, they were crushed immediately. All right, because they wanted to keep big trust, big business going. Now, J.P. Morgan, take him for example, he was the super wealthy banker. He spoke for most trusts when he was quoted as saying, "I owe the public nothing." So he doesn't really care about the people. He cares about his own self-interest and his own pocketbook. This is a guy that, he bought U.S. Steel from Andrew Carnegie and conglomerated turned it into a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And he's one of the wealthiest people to ever walk the face of the earth. And when asked, how much money does it take to be happy, what do you think his response was? Huh? Just a little bit more. That's what he said. Just a little bit more. This is a guy who's multi-billionaire. Okay, you ever heard of Chase Bank? Like, that's his bank. Okay, J.P. Morgan Chase. Okay, so he had no intent to to hold the rich people at the same level of accountability as poor people. And Teddy Roosevelt, being he's very highly moral. He's all about fairness. And in February of 1902, Teddy Roosevelt, he was president, and he ordered the Justice Department to file a lawsuit against a trust that J.P. Morgan owned. And that particular trust was Northern Securities Company. Now, Teddy Roosevelt was going to use a piece of legislation that was actually made in 1890 for the purpose of breaking up trusts. What was that legislation called? What was the antitrust legislation called from 1890? That's right, the Sherman Antitrust Act. All right, so now what Teddy Roosevelt's goal was to try to break up this monopoly, because what the Northern Securities Company had a monopoly on was they had control of all the railroads between the Great Lakes and the Pacific Ocean. That's a lot of railroads, okay? So they were able to control the prices and wages for literally half of the country when it came to the railroads. So that's, not good for the people. What do you think J.P. Morgan's reaction was when he found out that the president was suing him? Kind of shocked, like stunned. Like, what do you think you're doing? You're just the president. I am J.P. Morgan. Like, I'm the most powerful person in America, not you, president. And that's kind of how he thought, all right? So he was stunned. So he goes to Teddy Roosevelt, and he's like, look, if I've done something wrong, send your man to my man, and we'll get it fixed up. We'll fix it up behind closed doors. And Teddy Roosevelt said, I don't want to fix it up. I want to stop it. Because monopolies are bad. They're bad for people, bad for the average common person. So the court found that Northern Securities had been guilty of monopoly, in restraint of trade. And Teddy Roosevelt would go on to enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act 40 more times and break up 40 monopolies during his presidency. That is more than all three of his predecessors combined since the Sherman Antitrust Act was put on the books. More than all three of his predecessors combined. Now, this may not seem like that big a deal now, but it's important because Teddy Roosevelt is using the presidency in a way that had never been used before. Like we said yesterday, most presidents were just caretakers, not really shaking things up very much. But he was confident that the federal government had the ability and the responsibility to do what was right for the people. And he believed that all the United States economy affected individuals. If you don't have a job, if you're struggling, that's a problem. And the government should step in to do something about it. So therefore, he believed that the government was implicitly responsible to oversee things like the economy, to make sure that people were making it okay. So he is a great driving force in making the federal government a great centralizing national force, making it more and more powerful. So he believed that since these corporations were so large and powerful, that government must grow in order to reach the people and these major corporations. So I like to describe the presidency of the United States as like a soft leather glove. Imagine in your mind a soft leather glove, okay? And that's the office of the president. And once a person with a really big hand puts their hand into that glove stretches a little bit, okay? And then when they pull their hand out, the glove still kind of stays big. Even if a person with a small hand puts their hand in the glove, a person that doesn't want to use a lot of presidential authority, that glove is still big. So it can only get bigger. Teddy Roosevelt, when he became president, he made the glove extremely large, made the power of the president go way up. Probably more than any other president aside from Franklin Roosevelt. Not the same people. You guys know that, right? Okay. All right. Now, as far as the man himself, he raced through his day with cup after cup after cup after cup of coffee that was said to be as big as a bucket. He answered almost every letter wrote to him. Imagine that. He's the president, and people write the president letters from all over the nation. He answered them personally, almost every letter that was ever written to him. He wouldn't actually write them down, but he would dictate. He would speak to a staff of stenographers and answer every question. Thomas Jefferson is largely regarded as our greatest writing president, as there's evidence to prove that he wrote about 22,000 letters as president. Teddy Roosevelt wrote over 150,000 letters. Have you guys even sent 150,000 text messages? He wrote 150,000 letters. Okay, so he is by far the writingest president of American history. He would read at least one book per day. One book per day. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that he just sat on his rear and did nothing but read for 10 hours a day. He could speed read. He could read a whole book in an hour and then recall from what he read 5 years later. He's a genius, okay? He's a genius. But he's also one of those kind of geniuses that's kind of teetering on the edge of insanity, okay? He's a very charismatic man. Very much a Renaissance man. Ate a dozen eggs for breakfast most mornings, whether they be fried or scrambled or boiled. He'd eat about a dozen eggs a day. A lot of people just kind of describe him as like a one-man gas bag. Like he just never shut up. Like he's constantly talking. But he was usually saying something so interesting that people really didn't mind it. Like that he just talked incessantly. One of my favorite stories about Teddy Roosevelt is there was this big game hunter from England who was visiting Washington, D.C. Like this guy who's world-renowned big game hunter, okay? And when Teddy Roosevelt heard that this famed hunter was in town, he sent people out to bring him to the White House so he could meet him. He wanted to talk to him. Okay? So his people located him, and then this big, strapping English gentleman goes to the White House to meet Teddy Roosevelt because Teddy Roosevelt just wants to talk to him. So he's taken in the Oval Office. He's escorted in here to meet the president, and then the people that got him, shut the door and they leave. And then the people, outside, they wait about half an hour, and this big, large English guy just kind of walks out of the office, and he looks like he's exhausted. Like he looks exhausted. And the people outside were like, what did you tell the president? He's like, I told him my name. And that's all he said. The entire 30 minutes he was in there was just Teddy Roosevelt talking to him. This big game hunter that he wanted to meet. So, Teddy Roosevelt was a man of great energy. He was a large man, but he was also kind of larger than life. He played wild, kind of crazy games in the White House with people. He would challenge diplomats to wrestling matches. Like, hey, let's wrestle. Like, hey, guy from Czechoslovakia, let's wrestle. Like, imagine President of the United States accepting a foreign minister and like, hey, let's wrestle. He played a game that he called single stick with some of his cabinet members, and basically they would wrap themselves in like pillows and like mattresses, and they would take sticks and they would beat each other with them. And whoever was left standing won. Single stick. They just made it up, okay? He boxed. He was a great boxer. He boxed most of his life until one day while he was sparring, he took a shot to the eye and lost his vision in one of his eyes, boxing. So then he stopped boxing and he started practicing jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Okay, so he played tennis every day, but there's not a lot of pictures of him playing tennis. Why do you think? Manly game? Does he like to be seen as a big, strong, manly man? Tennis was also a game of wealthy people, which he was. He's a Roosevelt. He's a very wealthy person. But he did not want to be seen as a wealthy person. He wanted to be seen as a man of the people. So there's not a lot of pictures of him playing tennis. But when a cameraman failed to capture a picture of him jumping an obstacle with his horse, he was glad to do it again. Okay, because he was an excellent horseman. There he is looking directly in the camera. Okay, so just a fascinating kind of guy. One day, while he was campaigning for trust reform during his presidency in New England, this is his car, and he was crossing the road, and a trolley car crashed into his carriage and killed his bodyguard and broke his leg. He was thrown 30 feet in the air, and he broke his leg pretty badly, and he spent several weeks in a wheelchair. And for a man whose entire life is all about expending energy, being stuck in a wheelchair was misery for him. And during this time, he had to deal with a crisis with a coal mine labor strike. Coal mining was a business, and at this time in 1900, the rights of miners were under the control of mine owners. This is the time when miners were being not paid in money, but they were being paid in scrip. You guys heard these stories? You should. You're from West Virginia. So also in 1900, our entire country ran on anthracite coal. Like everything that we did, it was powered by coal. Our homes were heated by coal. Our entire country was depending upon it. So much of it came from the hills of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And it was an extremely nightmarish job. 16-hour days, constant threat of cave-ins, explosions, breathing dust, terrible existence to live, okay? Not to mention, low wages. You bring your boys to work with you, and they take big chunks of coal and turn them into little chunks of coal with hammers. So you can imagine, after they hadn't received a raise in 20 years, that they were upset. Their working conditions were bad, their work days were long, and their wages were low. So when it came to what laborers, what's the really only weapon they have? Strike. And so that's what they did. And when the strike happened, the miners' labor union, what's the coal miners' labor union? The UMWA, United Mine Workers of America. They called for 140,000 men to stop working. 140,000 men to stop working. So, nobody's mining coal. What happens to America? Yeah, people, especially when they do this strike, it's like November. What's coming up pretty quick? Winter. And people are heating their homes with coal. What happens to the steel industry? What happens to the railroad industry? It all kind of creeps to a halt. So after the strike, after several months of striking, this big time strike, the price of coal went from $5 a ton to $30 a ton. So 6 times the amount. Winter was coming. Homes would go unheated for those that could even afford it. That would, imagine your energy bill going up 6 times. Like my gas bill is like $220. So imagine that, multiply that by 6. Okay, it's my paycheck. It's like my entire paycheck. Okay, just to heat my home. So a lot of people would go without heat in the winter. So Roosevelt's administration, he was sure that they would take the blame. So he decided that he was going to try to take some action here. And this is something unprecedented, because when has the president ever gotten involved between a business and their labor force? Never. Okay, because up to this point, it's always been like business and government were not linked together. But he sees that people are going to go an entire winter without heat. And he says, that's bad for America. It's bad for our people. I need to do something about it. It's the moral and right thing to do. So he intervenes, with his broken leg. And he has no authority to do this. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the president has the right to arbitrate a business dispute. It's not in the Constitution. But, Roosevelt says, he summons both sides. He brings all the labor representatives, and he brings the mine owners, and he sits them in a room, and he says, look, I'm going to arbitrate this. I'm going to mediate. We're going to come to an agreement. And the mine owners are like, we don't have to do this, and you cannot make us. And Teddy Roosevelt says, well, that's fine, very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the United States is in a national emergency, and I'm going to nationalize. I'm going to have a government takeover of the mining industry. So I'm going to take your business from you. Now, he also has no authority to do that either, but he's kind of a intimidating guy, okay? So whenever they do say, you have no constitutional authority to do that, he says the Constitution was made by the people and for the people. And so, therefore, I'm going to do what's best for the people. I'm constitutionally within my power to do this if I'm helping people. And that's the argument that he provides. So, the mine owners retreated. They agreed to follow some of the suggestions that the president made. But eventually they agreed to a 10% pay raise and a 9-hour workday. So the strike ended and American homes would be heated, and Teddy Roosevelt and his Republican Party would maintain the presidency and the majority in both houses. So he becomes the very first president ever to mediate a labor dispute. The first president ever to treat labor as a full partner in business. And the first president to threaten to use the United States military to to seize a strike-bound industry. Like he's going to take it over. And it all worked. It all worked. So, kind of, very interesting guy. Teddy Roosevelt, like I said, he read a lot. And he was a big fan of this West African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick. That's a West African proverb. What does that mean? Speak softly and carry a big stick. Nope. Nobody wants to take a stab at it?
Like, be authoritative when you speak, but watch what you're saying.
That's good. That's good. You're right. Like, you don't really have to say anything. It doesn't matter what you say. It matters what you do. Okay? Speak softly. Yeah, you can say a lot of stuff. Talk doesn't get much done. What gets done is action. Because he's all about action. Okay? Now, at this time, American expansionism was going on. Remember, we just won the Spanish-American War, and now we have an American empire. We have the Philippines, we have Guam, we have Cuba, we have Puerto Rico, Wake Island, Midway Island, all these places that we have acquired over the years, and many of these new places that we had just attained from the Spanish. The United States had just annexed Hawaii, and Spain is no longer not present in the Western Hemisphere. They're completely removed from this half of planet Earth. So we dominated all the areas in which they used to have. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, even to the point where we engaged in a bloody campaign against the Filipino people who wanted to be free from our foreign rule. Tens of thousands of people died in the Philippines trying to maintain it. This is all during his presidency. Remember I told you about the Filipino insurrection? Well, Teddy Roosevelt was very much an expansionist and very much an imperialist. He's like, we are America and we should be the greatest. All right? So he received a lot of criticism for that. And he did not concern himself with that criticism because Teddy Roosevelt was a man of the times, just like he's, everyone else here. And he kind of, he divided the world into what he called civilized nations. They kind of coined that term, civilized nations. Well, what makes a civilized nation, do you think? In Teddy Roosevelt's opinion, in 1902, what is Teddy Roosevelt's opinion of a civilized nation? What characteristics? Can anybody take one guess at a characteristic of a civilized? Is America a civilized nation in 1902? Would he consider America one? Whom else would he consider? England? Spain, sure. France? What do these countries have in common? They what?
They have a war.
Okay, they have a government. They definitely have military. What do they look like? They're white. They're white people. Another thing they have is industry. Industrialized nations consisting mostly of white people. You're civilized. That was a civilized nation according to Teddy Roosevelt. Like I said, he's a man of the times. It's a racist opinion, but that was an opinion that was held very widely. Okay? It doesn't make it right or wrong, but it is what it is. Okay? So, uncivilized nations are places that do not have industry. But more than likely, they have labor and they have raw materials. And probably dark-skinned people. Everywhere from the Philippines to Africa to Central America. Darker-skinned people and raw materials. Okay? So, he wants to civilize these people. Okay? Because he believed, and it's not just Teddy Roosevelt, other progressives believed that they were also incapable of self-government. What does that mean if you are incapable of self-government? What do you need if you are not capable of governing yourself? Someone to rule over you, because you are not capable. So, therefore, it is his Christian duty to rule over these people, to civilize them, to bring them industry, to bring them Christianity, and to let white people tell them what to do. Okay? Now, he believed it was the duty of civilized nations. It was your mandated responsibility for a civilized nation to bring this stuff to the uncivilized nation. Okay? And so Teddy Roosevelt and other civilized nations, they kind of start divvying up the earth. Britain would be responsible for India and Egypt. Japan would control Korea and the Yellow Sea. The United States would control what? The western half of planet Earth. Does this sound like something we've talked about before? Where America should only be in control of planet half western hemisphere? Who came up with that idea? Stay out of the western hemisphere. James Monroe with the Monroe Doctrine. He does that in 1823. Well, when Teddy Roosevelt comes up with this and says, okay, you're going to have this part, but we're going to industrialize the western half of planet Earth. This is called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And for Roosevelt, his great expansionist vision was a South American canal that would connect the two oceans together, Atlantic and Pacific. He thought it was almost necessary and essential to have a canal to connect these two oceans for America's growing naval power. Well, if you've ever looked at a map of the world, where is the skinniest part where a canal could most easily be built? Panama, okay? Because Panama is an isthmus. You know what an isthmus is? It's a skinny area of land connecting two larger areas of land. That's what an isthmus is. That's a geographical term. Now, there was already a canal underway, and the French were building it. A French company actually already started building the canal in the Colombian province of Panama. Panama was not its own sovereign nation. Panama belonged to Colombia. And their effort, the French company's effort to build the Panama Canal, was failing due to a lack of planning, lack of money, and deadly tropical diseases, because Panama is right around the equator where there's lots of tropical diseases. And they had French people building it who had no immunity to these tropical diseases. So Teddy Roosevelt was offered to buy the rights to the project, to build the Panama Canal. So he instructed his secretary, his personal secretary, to negotiate a treaty with Colombia. And this treaty with Colombia would give them $10 million plus an annual rental fee for the canal. Just the canal. 10 million bucks for an area like 20 miles wide and like as wide as an interstate. When the Colombian government got the deal, what do you think they said? So let's see if we can get some more out of them. That's America. They said they rejected the deal and demanded double. They want to double the price. Teddy Roosevelt, not happy about that. Enraged even. He says, this is the highway to future civilization. They are getting in the way of progress, getting in the way of our ability to bring industry to the world. Now, he's upset, but he doesn't take brash action immediately. And we will talk about the action that he takes tomorrow.